ever happened to you? Hi, my name is Tim, and I'm with the PWCPG ATM 2022. What's the PWCPG ATM 2022, you ask? Well, it's quite simple. It's just the Pokemon World Championship Professional Gaming Association, trademark 2022. In just 379 easy steps, you will never lose another Pokemon battle for the rest of your life. Only be sharing 7 of those steps, but for 4 small payments, 94.23, the other 372 of those steps will be yours. Just call 555 low punny for life and change my wallpaper. I'm on to step number 2. What happened to step 1? I thought you never asked. To get access to step 1, you'll first need to make those 4 easy payments for 98.56 that I mentioned earlier. Oh wait. Now that you made those 4 simple payments of 99.96, let's continue on with step 2. What I want you to do is delete that terrible thought was good. Bop. Bop. Goodbye. Nope. And garbage. We can keep this one. Step 6. Now that we have a blank slate, let's begin adding Pokemon onto our team. To be really successful in Pokemon, you have to battle with your favorites. My favorite Pokemon is Oh, I didn't notice I was still recording. There, you just got an exclusive step completely free. Now let's move on to the next step. Step 7. I want you to add a Pokemon that will cover the weaknesses of the first Pokemon you would add. So, for example, normal is weak to... Oh, you really are sneaky. That means step 7.5. Use your resources. Don't be afraid to finish off I knew that normal was fine. Of course I knew. I was doing that for the video. For you, now that we know that low bunny is weak to fighting, let's add a counter. First, my favorite counter to fighting is Gardevoir. Gardevoir also happens to be my third favorite Pokemon. My second favorite? Paramount. We're not adding it. Step 10. Now that we have low bunny and Gardevoir, go ahead and notice that we need a Pokemon that can take some damage. We, in the competitive Pokemon community, like the Pokemon to evolve. I'm going to go ahead and add a Vaporeon. Did you know that in terms of the next wall that we're going to add is Deoxys? Attack. Moves like recover. Come on. Stupid. Pokemon living on truly the definition of a wall. On a step 84. Telling you right now, if you want access to step 11 to 83, I got a discount going right now. 4 extremely easy payments, 94. 1 cent off the first price. You know how much 100 cents are? You could buy 1 dinner off the $1 bill. We need a Pokemon that won't take damage from round up. So we need a Pokemon that won't take damage from electric. So I'm gonna pick one of my favorites. Lander, Staring. Everybody says this Pokemon is good, but I don't get why. Now that you've completed your team, let's start with step 372. We'll be adding items, moves, and lightning ability. Items are an extremely important aspect to competitive Pokemon. If you want your Pokemon to be just right, I suggest you add only the best items. I'm gonna go with a choice band on my system for back to power. Utility Majesty is the ability, and for the moves, I'm gonna go with Drop Kick, High Jump Kick, Low Kick, and Mega Kick. We want our Serena to hit as hard as we can possible. Also though, we're gonna get rid of Focus Sash. This will be the most important item on the team. The ability for Flux. This will be the best thing for the low. Now that you completed adding your moves, let's begin the most important process. Step 173. Nature, EVs, and items. EV stands for effort value, and IV stands for something else.
Udah dari
These sliders really don't
kemarin kan, malam.
kind of hold up now that you're completing your team with 279 steps, the most important step is 380. To start a battle, I like to start my battle with my tank, my wall. My line is defense. A lot of people like to say, the Oxys attack isn't a wall. It has some of the weakest teams. You don't know what you want. I like to present to you the Soul. This OP item can turn any Pokemon into a reliable tank. Increase your supplement defense by 50%, which basically means you have
ready to go to the gym?
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, hold up. First, I gotta take my pre-workout. It's called Orangutan Superman. It has so much BCAA, bro. Bah! I can feel it coursing through my veins.
The label says it takes about 30 minutes to kick in. Alright, I'm back once again to upset the poor old supplement industry that makes billions while selling you unregulated powders, by the way, but at least the blueberry flavor is pretty dang delicious. And this time I'm tackling a supplement I'm not necessarily against people taking, but boy does it have to dial back just a bit as far as how great it actually is. Let's get straight to it. We're talking about pre-workouts. For those of you new to the world of fitness supplements, a pre-workout is a supplement often taken before exercise, thus the name pre-workout. It is often marketed as a performance booster for strength workouts as well as endurance like cardio, but on the low, marketers know it's almost 100% used by our fellow lifting bros and broettes. Pre-workouts can indeed give this extra jolts of energy and bro-like sensation that undoubtedly make people feel like they can push out a few more reps, go heavier, or train just a bit longer. Now that all sounds grits and gravy, but again, the problem isn't so much that pre-workouts do not make you feel energetic, but sometimes it goes too far in what it advertises. And my job as your friendly neighborhood trying to be unbiased with helping you with your fitness goals picture fit, if I can save you from needlessly spending your money, then that makes me happy, and hopefully Zendaya returns my phone calls. But what exactly is my gripe with pre-workouts? Well, I'll break it down into 4 key points. Let's get right into it. The first point is that a lot of the stuff added into a pre-workout, although can be helpful, actually does not rely on the time you take it to be effective. You're likely to find ingredients in your pre-workout like BCAAs, creatine, and beta-alanine. BCAAs, very important amino acids that are directly connected to muscle protein synthesis, which plays a significant role in muscle growth. Creatine, one of the most studied substances in exercise performance, known for providing additional energy, particularly in anaerobic and intense training. It also has cognitive brain-related benefits. And beta-alanine, a precursor to carnosine production, which buffers acid buildup in skeletal muscle to allow for increased training duration at high intensity. Again, great ingredients, but taking them before your workout doesn't really do anything.
But Mr. Picture Fat, so what if it doesn't matter when you take it? If it helps, then that's a good thing.
True, but that's only if you're taking them on a regular basis, like daily. Unless you're on a masochistic plan of working out every single day, which I'm not totally against, then you're not taking a pre-workout on a daily basis, which might make these ingredients less effective. And usually, pre-workouts have lower than recommended dosages, even for ingredients that do have an effect before your workout, like citrulline, all the while charging you much higher prices than it would cost to get these ingredients separately. But of course, this is not exactly common knowledge to the average gym goer, and best believe supplement companies know that. But what's worse than charging you more for good ingredients is charging you anything at all for bad ingredients. And that's point number 2. I don't really want to say bad, but more so just ineffective. Again, playing on the general lack of knowledge in supplements, there's a lot of things included in many pre-workouts that simply do very little. This includes things like conjugated linoleic acid, glutamine, a wide variety of unproven plant extracts, and BCAAs. More on BCAAs in a bit. In the scientific research, these aforementioned ingredients have yet to show any meaningful benefits in the realm of general exercise performance, regardless of the time of consumption. The data simply does not support them being of any use. Again, supplement companies are probably relying on you not knowing this and would appreciate if you just stare at their complex ingredient label thinking you're getting your money's worth. After all, who doesn't like a little bit of complexity? It makes us feel sophisticated, special. Even better if they have some top secret energy blend where they don't tell you what dosages is included of each ingredient you're getting, cause boom, complexity. Or maybe so they can charge you more. We'll never know. And there's definitely a lot more needless stuff that are shoved into a pre-workout, and if you're a bit savvy on reading ingredients as well, please share in the comments some of the very strange ingredients you've seen. For everyone else, be smart about your money and reconsider whether you want to buy a product that shoves a bunch of stuff in it that doesn't do much of anything. Now on to the third point. What makes a pre-workout really tick falls almost entirely on one single ingredient that even your grandma takes on a regular basis, and that is caffeine. Caffeine, the most widely used stimulant in the world, is almost guaranteed in all pre-workout supplements, minus the ones that advertise to contain no stimulants. And that's because, as Mima might know from cranking out PRs on the knitting rack after her morning Folgers, caffeine has a time-dependent ergogenic energy-boosting effect by inhibiting the sleep-inducing effects of the brain-related substance called adenosine. Without caffeine, you will likely have no idea if your pre-workout did a single thing, and that, my friends, don't sell very well, even with all the other fun complexities. And I know this is probably beating a dead horse radish at this point, but supplement companies are banking on you to not really know that. But now you do. And the final point I want to make ties it all together with a neat little bow, and I did touch on this somewhat already, is that there's simply better and less expensive ways to get all the good ingredients. Caffeine, kind of straightforward. Why pay such a premium to get the most important ingredient when many caffeine products like little tea, coffee, or just straight up caffeine supplements are so much cheaper, minus Starbucks of course. But just like you normally would, be wary about how much caffeine you take, because tolerance will be very different from person to person. 800 milligrams might totally kick your butt, while 300 milligrams for Mima means falling asleep before she finishes knitting your second mitten. In terms of the other ingredients, the same applies. They are fairly cheap on their own, and it's better just to target the ones that actually help, like creatine and beta-alanine, and not waste money on things that don't, like glutamine and CLA. And then there's things like BCAAs. For the eagle eyes out there, you probably noticed that I included BCAAs in the list of good ingredients as well as the bad. I'm not going to dive too into it in this video, but I do have another video about it which I'll link in the description. But the main thing about BCAAs, short for branched chain amino acids, is that its effects are almost always better when included with other essential amino acids, which are not found in pre-workouts, but in much better supplements we all know as protein powders, like whey. Purchasing protein supplements or just getting enough protein in general is usually more than enough to get all your BCAAs and other essential amino acids, and once again helps your poor little wallet. And that's the main takeaway. Save your money. Either spend it on things that are actually worth your time and money.
90% of the world's adults consume some form of caffeine every day, making it the most widely used psychoactive drug on Earth. Michael Pollan, best-selling author of books on plant pharmacology, explains why.
A very strong case can be made that caffeine contributed to the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason and the Industrial Revolution, all of which required us to think in much more focused linear terms. Caffeine was an amazing aid to the rise of capitalism.
Compared to other beverages, coffee is a relative newcomer, spreading slowly from Africa through the Middle East and into the West only a few centuries ago. Yet, it's hard to even imagine a world without it.
Before caffeine comes to Europe, people were drunk or buzzed most of the day. People would have alcohol with breakfast. Water was contaminated with disease. But alcohol, because of the fermentation process, would kill a lot of microbes. So you gave your kids hard cider in the morning. There were beer breaks on farms. People addled on alcohol are not going to be so rational, are not going to be so linear in their thinking, and are not going to be so energetic.
Coffee consumption, along with tea and chocolate, all of which have caffeine, became widespread in Europe in the 17th century. And coffee houses popped up all over London.
So there were coffee houses dedicated to literature, and writers and poets would congregate there. There was a coffee house dedicated to selling stock, and that turned into the London Stock Exchange eventually. There was another one dedicated to science, tied to the Royal Institution, where great scientists of the period would get together. And Isaac Newton was a big coffee fan. Voltaire, the Enlightenment figure, apparently had 72 cups a day. I don't know quite how you do that. Diderot wrote the Encyclopedia on caffeine. This new, sober, more civil drink was changing the way people thought and the way they worked. Once you're doing work with machinery, indoors, doing double-entry bookkeeping and all that kind of head work, alcohol is the wrong drug, and caffeine is the right drug. Caffeine allows you also to break your ties to the rhythms of the sun. Before caffeine, basically people started work when the sun came up and stopped when it went down. With caffeine and with light or gaslight, you could have a night shift. You could now have an overnight shift.
It's not hard to see a through line from coffeed-up workers keeping up with the pace of the machines in the factories to the rise of office culture and the establishment of the coffee break in the 1950s. Caffeine has made us super productive.
There's a very interesting body of research that suggests that caffeine does improve focus and memory and the ability to learn. So it seems to help us lock in memories. As for focus, it increases our ability to concentrate on a task. It's incredibly important for modern work.
And of course, caffeine also gives us a burst of energy. But how exactly? Coffee has less than 5 calories.
Caffeine seem to be in violation of the laws of thermodynamics. Essentially, caffeine borrows energy from your future and gives it to you in the present. Caffeine occupies a receptor that normally is occupied by a chemical called adenosine. And this is the chemical that over the course of the day builds up and makes you feel tired and prepares the brain for sleep. Caffeine gets in there and blocks that receptor so you never feel that tiredness.
Right, and that's the catch. Caffeine messes with your sleep because 4 to 6 hours after you drink it, half of it is still swirling around in your body.
But even if you cut it out earlier in the day, the quality of your sleep may suffer. Not the quantity necessarily, but the quality. By which I mean your deep sleep, your slow wave sleep. A kind of sleep that's dreamless and very deep and is very important to kind of brain hygiene. It's where your brain kind of takes out the garbage every night and cleans up the desktop. And that kind of sleep suffers. So there's no free lunch, right, in nature and in medicine.
So is the price we pay for poor sleep worth the benefits that caffeine gives us?
There have been decades of research into caffeine. The current research is that on balance, it contributes much more to your health than it takes away, and that it's protective against many kinds of cancer, cardiovascular disease, Parkinson's, dementia. In the American diet, coffee and tea represent the single biggest source of antioxidants. And antioxidants are very important to cellular health and preventing cancer. And we eat so few plants, so few vegetables and fruit in this country that we're getting most of those antioxidants from coffee and tea. It's kind of remarkable that it has such a clean bill of health, with that one exception of what it does to your sleep, or what it can do to your sleep.
Right. Caffeine ruins our sleep so that the next morning we reach for more caffeine. And the cycle of addiction continues.
You know, we tend to moralize addiction, but is it really a bad thing to be dependent on a plant that you have easy access to, you can afford, that isn't ruining your life and is giving you some benefit? The way in which individuals are addicted to caffeine is mirrored in our society. We have organized our society in such a way with like globe-spanning trade, working long hours, and changing the climate and changing the environment. We have created a world in which caffeine is indispensable, and therefore the coffee plant and the tea plant are indispensable. And we've created exactly the world they need in which to thrive. So I can't think of a more clever evolutionary strategy.
Enggak lah, tergantung perspektif. Menurut gua esensial karena ngebantu.
Caffeine will make up for lost sleep.
Caffeine detoxes your body.
Oh, please.
Caffeine is addictive.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Hi, my name is Dr. Sophie Balzora. I'm a gastroenterologist at NYU Grossman School of Medicine.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ugur Roku. I'm a gastroenterologist at Mount Sinai Hospital.
And today we'll be debunking myths about caffeine. Caffeine is bad for you.
Caffeine is not bad for you. So there was a time where I must admit I had bought the hype that caffeine was bad for you, but when you do the research, you find out that a lot of the concerns really don't hold up. There are concerns about caffeine causing osteoporosis.
I mean, bini gue lagi tidur, so ya normal lah.
Cause that are excessive of 700 milligrams a day. The amount of caffeine that's being consumed daily is usually on the order of less than 300 milligrams a day. And so a lot of these concerns really don't apply at those levels.
There's actually a lot of benefit to caffeine in coffee. So there have been studies showing, decrease in cancers like colon cancer, head and neck cancers, breast cancer, chronic liver disease, a lot of other kind of inflammatory conditions that we worry about.
So chemicals that are able to act upon that and reduce inflammatory processes, and caffeine is one of those compounds that can do that.
3 cups of coffee is seen to lower your risk of stroke in certain studies. Tea can do the same by lowering the risk by 20%, and also dark chocolate.
And in those few instances where your specialist may tell you to cut down on caffeine, whether it's your cardiologist or your gastroenterologist, those are isolated cases, so speak to your doctor. But in general, myth, caffeine is not in general bad for you. Caffeine will make up for lost sleep.
That's a myth, because there is nothing that could make up for lost sleep other than adequate, restful, replenishing sleep.
All caffeine does is increase your alertness and make you feel like you're more energetic, but it doesn't actually give you more energy. Nature has created an important molecule called adenosine, and that's this molecule over here. And essentially, adenosine tells your brain it's time to go to bed. What caffeine does is to block adenosine's message and keep you thinking that you should be awake. But when the effect of caffeine wears off, the adenosine's still there, and your body will still crash a little bit. If a person does choose to neglect their sleep and try to replace that with caffeine, they're going to find that their sleep pattern is just continually affected. They'll have lower levels of REM sleep, and if you drink too close to bedtime, they'll actually have a decreased amount of sleep as well.
Ultimately, the brain needs sleep, and you're not going to get that from consuming extra amounts of caffeine. This is a good one. Decaf coffee doesn't have caffeine.
I've been waiting to do this.
Rip it.
Myth. Decaf may sound like they completely deed the calf, but it does not mean that. It just means it's reduced. I think by the FDA, formal recommendations are that there should be 95% of the caffeine taken away from a content before it can be called a decaf. But sometimes there can be variation from cup to cup to cup. You might see it somewhere on the order of 15 or so milligrams a cup. And again, this is as compared to 80 to like 160 milligrams, depending on the exact type of coffee you're drinking. As a gastroenterologist, if I'm talking to a person who has a lot of acid reflux, sometimes what we want to do is to reduce the amount of caffeine that the person takes, not down to zero. The reduced amount sometimes does help that person get over their reflux symptoms a little better. It's not zero, but it's a lot less caffeine than typically you find in that cup. Drinking coffee will stunt your growth.
So, thankfully, drinking coffee, drinking caffeine, all those things do not stunt your growth. Most of our growth happens during our childhood and adolescence, of course. Ultimately, once bone growth is complete, then there's no stunting of growth that occurs.
When you look at the amount of caffeine consumption in teenagers, it usually typically maxes out at about 80 milligrams a day, and any kind of risk to your bones with calcium or magnesium loss, again, usually occurs above 700 milligrams a day. So the kids will be fine. They're not consuming, in general, enough caffeine to really warrant any concern about calcium loss from their bones.
700, 800 grams a day, that's like at least like 8+ cups of coffee.
That's a lot of
That's a huge amount. So I mean, the things that affect bone growth the most would be the health status of the kid, chronic illnesses, or something that causes malnutrition, for instance, genetics. So how tall are your parents? How tall are your siblings? Those are the types of things that really impact growth. It's not really going to be caffeine consumption.
what she said. Caffeine in soda is much less than caffeine in coffee.
I'm going to say that that's a myth. I think that what's important to know, and I think what people don't really realize, is that it really depends on the beverage. There are some sodas that have tons of caffeine, right? Significantly higher amounts than what we consider in an average cup of coffee. You really got to look at that label to see what the caffeine content is.
So as you can see here, soda has 40 milligrams in that can of cola, and that's greater than your shot of espresso, which only has 27 milligrams. At the same time, it's also less than your black tea, which has 45 milligrams, less than your instant coffee at 82 milligrams, and less than your brewed coffee at 95 milligrams. These are averages, but it just goes to show that soda can just have more caffeine than some drinks and less than others.
Caffeine detoxes your body.
Oh, please, Roger. One of the more common conversations I'll have with my patients is about this concept of detoxification. You may see something on the internet which promises that no matter what you eat or consume, that if you take this detoxification product, it just takes out all the bad items and leaves you feeling healthy. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. It's better to watch what you're putting in your body before you put it in there than to try to edit it after it's already been incorporated. And so this concept of caffeine as a detoxifying agent is one of them, because it can lead to people using it as an enema. So that means when they insert fluid into the rectum up to their colon, but it's not safe, it has not been proven, and it could lead to a lot of injury in the colon, burning, perforations even.
That is what the kidney's for, that is what the liver's for, that is what your intestines are for, really, is to get rid of waste.
If there's one detoxifying agent, it's just water. You just want to make sure you're drinking enough water so that your bowels are moving, your kidneys are happy, the urine is flowing, the body will take care of the rest.
Caffeine dehydrates you.
This is one of those tricky ones that's not completely true. Caffeine is a mild diuretic. If you consume about 300 milligrams of caffeine, it might slightly increase your urine output by about 4 fluid ounces, but that's not a large amount, especially if you think about the fact that a lot of the ways we consume caffeine are filled with water themselves. So I'm gonna call this myth.
I could not agree more, Ugo. I think that's a huge myth. I think that people can get thirsty after drinking caffeine, especially if you're adding things to the caffeine, right? Or if there's a lot of extra sugar in that caffeine, then that can make you thirsty. And so it's not really the caffeine itself that is causing that sensation of thirst, but perhaps the additives to the drink as a whole.
The other thing is that everyone gets thirsty, and so you probably just aren't drinking enough fluid. So a cup of coffee is not gonna do it. Make sure you're drinking a lot of fluid throughout the day.
Caffeine is addictive.
Ooh, this is a good one. Caffeine is not considered an addicting substance. There is a need to use it oftentimes, routinely, to maintain alertness, especially in the morning, right upon rising. But at the end of the day, it's considered that your physical dependence on caffeine as a substance is not so severe to truly call it an addiction. If you were to go cold turkey with your coffee intake, as much as that scares you, you feel horrible for about a day or two, lasting for an additional week, you would feel off. But then you'd find yourself back to a new normal. And so, no, caffeine is not necessarily an addictive substance.
Caffeine is short acting. There's no danger in going, completely cold turkey from drinking caffeine every day, multiple cups to just stop you.
Having more than 1 cup of coffee a day is bad for you.
I'd say that's definitely a myth.
The general thought is that if you're consuming 400 milligrams or less of caffeine in a day, that's a very safe amount for you to consume. Now, what you have to remember is what's in a cup may differ depending on exactly how big that cup is and exactly what type of caffeine preparation you're drinking. So you want to define what a cup is. Typically, it's 8 fluid ounces. You can have many of those before you run into that 400 level, which is considered a nice low level that you can reach every day.
Not all things are equal. It applies to different people. So if you're pregnant, for instance, if you may have certain heart conditions or gastrointestinal conditions, then those kind of rules may vary, and you may have a recommendation from your physician that you may be drinking much less than that, if at all.
So all my patients who are about to show me this video, stop. This applies to you. For different reasons, you can't have that 4th cup, but maybe when you're feeling better, we'll talk about it. You won't be able to sleep if you have caffeine at night.
I'm going to say this is a myth. So when I drink coffee at night, nothing happens. The way that caffeine affects you and your brain really varies from person to person. So we can't have this blanket statement saying, you can't drink caffeine or coffee before bed. So part of the reason why people can drink caffeine at different hours of the day has a lot to do with how you metabolize it in your body. And that is in large part due to genetics.
It's good to note that caffeine as a molecule has a half-life of 5 hours. What does that mean? It means that 5 hours after you consume it, you'll just have about 50% of that cup of coffee left in your body. The one thing we will say is that drinking a lot of caffeine, especially close to bedtime, will probably affect your sleep health. You might find that you have a less amount of sleep per night or less amount of hours getting that good, deep, refreshing REM sleep. But again, everyone metabolizes things slightly differently.
It's not consumed in a vacuum, right? There's so many other things going on in our day-to-day that affect how tired we are, how alert we need to be.
So if you've been up all day and you've exerted a lot of energy and you're just tired and fatigued, you will still crash and go to bed.
caffeine can mess with your heart rhythm.
I am going to say myth to this. This is actually an issue that has been studied extensively. There was a recently performed study where they looked at a community-based cohort of over 30,000 people. And what they found was that caffeine intake in moderate levels did not increase risk of arrhythmias. In fact, they found that for every additional cup you had a 3% decrease in your likelihood of having an arrhythmia.
Sometimes people can get heart palpitations or feel like their heart is racing, which we call tachycardia, right? And that can happen with caffeine, and there can also even be a transient increase in your blood pressure. But these things are not long-lasting. These things aren't dangerous. And what's even more good news is that for habitual coffee drinkers or caffeine consumers, that effect eventually wears away. So when we think about abnormal heart rhythms or dangers to the heart, we actually see that caffeine is protected.
Talk to your cardiologist, but thus far, myth. Ooh, this is a hard one.
Tea is healthier than coffee.
I'm going to call it a myth. And the reason why I call it a myth is that you cannot say tea is healthier than coffee as a blanket statement, and it always holds true. If you dump tons of sugar in your tea, you cannot still say that that's a healthy beverage. And then to balance that, coffee can be very healthy as well. Coffee, again, is a major source of antioxidants for Americans. We don't perhaps eat enough fruits and vegetables. And so we end up getting a lot of things that we should be getting from fruits and vegetables, believe it or not, from our coffee plant.
What we also need to understand is that I think there's a lot of more robust data for coffee, and it's been studied a little bit more, and we can make more kind of concrete statements about its benefits. So it's not to say that tea benefits aren't there or that we know for a fact that tea is healthier than coffee, because we don't. But right now, we have to say that this is a myth. If you're trying to drink one over another for health benefits, and it's about the caffeine, I think it's comparable. I think that there's this misconception that there's not as much caffeine in tea, which is quite false.
And it all depends on exactly what tea and what coffee you're talking about. We're trying to use generic terms for very different substances. You have teas like rooibos teas and teas that are green teas and Earl teas. They're all very different with different components. In general, they tend to represent a good, healthy source of caffeine and other substances, but so do coffees too. The way you prepare your coffee doesn't matter.
Myth. There's so many different ways to prepare coffee, and it does matter in terms of how much caffeine results in that cup.
So if you look at this little graphic, it shows you a number of things that might affect the amount of caffeine that's in your brewed beverage. What's the particle size? What's the brew time? How hot is the water you're using for your brewing? And then also, how much are you diluting your actual caffeine in your content? You tend to have a fairly high quantity of caffeine in your coffee pods because it's ground really finely. The temperature used to brew it is very hot, and so a lot of caffeine can be extracted up to 75 to 150 milligrams per cup. For your French press, although there is a prolonged brewing time, oftentimes the actual size of the grinding is very coarse, and so that limits the amount of caffeine that you find in your French press.
And also where it comes from too. I think where the bean actually originates can affect how much caffeine is present.
So at the end of the day, I think what we learned is that caffeine actually can be very good for you, despite all the myths that we've heard all our lives.
I think that some people have guilt around drinking caffeine and coffee, but there's so many benefits, very few risks. Of course, it's important to talk to your doctor about what's best for you, but ultimately, we don't want to deprive people of something that they love because the benefits are abound, and you know what? It really tastes great.
I like how you went.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
And one of the things I'm trying to do with This Is Your Mind on Plants is start that post-drug war conversation about drugs, which is one of the reasons I included caffeine, a totally legal drug that everybody uses. What does that have to teach us? In a way, one of the most powerful drug experiences I've had in my life was the first cup of coffee after 3 months off.
Really?
It was psychedelic. It was incredible. Yeah.
Come on.
Try it. Try getting off caffeine for a
3
while.
months?
3 months without caffeine.
How am I going to do a podcast?
You may have to take a hiatus.
I'm going to run out of things to talk about. I'll fall asleep.
It was really hard. I did it actually at the suggestion of Roland Griffith, who, the psychedelic researcher, who before that was the world's leading expert on caffeine. And I was interviewing him about caffeine for this chapter. And he said, well, you're never going to understand your relationship to caffeine until you get off it. So it was kind of a dare. and it was really hard. It was one of the hardest things I've done.
Really?
I was a mess.
For how long?
3 months.
You're
No,
a
I mean,
mess until
I
you.
was functional after a month. The first week I was not functional at all. I felt like I had contracted ADD. I could not stay on track. Everything, the periphery just kept intruding on my thinking. I couldn't write. I mean, writing is the most linear thing you can do, right?
Right.
And it's all about concentration, obviously. And I couldn't concentrate. And I felt like there was this veil between me and reality that, you know, I was not quite seeing, getting, feeling. And it was weird. I didn't feel myself for the whole time. And I thought, what does that mean? It means yourself is caffeinated. and that is baseline consciousness for me and for many people. And that's not a bad thing, but I think we have a debt to these plants that we owe them. And so I spent a lot of time in that researching that chapter, looking back in history for when caffeine enters the West. And it doesn't happen until the 1650s in Europe. So we actually have a before and after, which we don't with a lot of drugs because they just go back millennia. And before caffeine, it was a very different world and a very different consciousness. People were drunk a lot of the time, buzzed almost all of the time. People drank morning, noon, and night because it was safer than water. Right, water was really how you got diseases. If you fermented things, even low alcohol, would kill all the microbes. So people, even kids, you gave your kids hard cider for breakfast. Wow. And this was true in America up until the 1800s, up until Prohibition. But anyway, caffeine comes along in the 1650s, and tea and chocolate and coffee all arrive in the same decade. It's kind of a great decade, right? And things start to change.
In the form of coffee?
Coffee and tea and chocolate, which also has caffeine.
And so what would they had never experienced coffee before the 1600s?
That's right. They had in the Arab world. They'd had it from like 1200 or something like that. Supposedly it was discovered in 800s by a herder in like Ethiopia who noticed that his goats were getting very frisky when they ate this particular berry and would stay up all night. And so he kind of like started experimenting, or he brought it to these monks and they made a drink, and it was like, ooh.
It makes sense that it was in the Arab world, because if you think about all the science that was being done in the Arab world, all the literature back then.
So one theory is that the Arab world had coffee first and had this incredible golden age.
Yes.
And there's a historian of psychoactives named Wolfgang Schivelbusch, and he correlates.
Name.
Isn't that wonderful? German, of course. Wolfgang Schivelbusch. It's a great book. It's called Taste of Paradise. Highly recommend it. And he said this was the perfect drug for the culture that invented mathematics and had this incredible, and it helped the culture in two ways. One was, as safe as alcohol made water, boiling it made it much safer. And coffee and tea, of course, both require boiling water. No one drank boiling water or hot beverages before. So this gave this incredible public health boost to these places. And then you have the drug that basically fosters a kind of more linear, rational, focused way of thinking. And so there is a lot of evidence linking coffee and tea consumption with the Enlightenment in France and with the Age of Reason in England. And people in the 1600s started writing about it. So like, wow, people, we have this new civil and sober drink and it was so popular because it was new that people drank less and they used more caffeine. And that, I think, makes possible things like the Industrial Revolution, because when you're doing physical labor outdoors, which was most of history, right? You could be buzzed. You didn't have to know what time it was. You worked from sun up to sundown. There were beer breaks actually on farms in England. They would give you beer because it gave you calories and made you happy. But when you start moving into like running machines and doing double entry bookkeeping, you need a clearer head. And when you start moving toward night shifts and overnight shifts, you couldn't do that without caffeine. and that's when it begins. There's a whole new, like, it freed us from the rhythms of the sun, which dictated everything in Western culture. You could only work till the sun went down. So it had a profound effect on capitalism, the rise of capitalism, and the clearest illustration of that I came across is the coffee break. Where did that come from? The coffee break actually has a history. We know the company that came up with it. And it was a necktie manufacturer in Denver called Wigwam Weavers.
Really?
And Wigwam Weavers made these very intricate silk neckties. And during World War II, they lost all their best loom operators to the war effort. So they hired these old guys to do it, who weren't getting drafted, and they couldn't do it very well. Then they hired these women to do it, and they could do it beautifully. And there were very intricate patterns, very complicated looms. I mean, you've seen how they, patterns on neckties. And the women could do it really well, but only for about 4 or 5 hours. So they called a meeting, and the owners said to the workers, what can we do? We have to improve your efficiency, and, we need more output. And the women said, well, give us a coffee break. They didn't call it that initially. And give us some time at like 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, and give us some coffee and tea. So we started doing it, and overnight, like, their productivity and efficiency goes up, quality control goes up, and so he institutes the coffee break. And think about it. Your employer gives you a drug and then gives you time off in which to ingest it during the workday.
Yeah.
Why would they do that? Because it contributes mightily. So the coffee break might seem like it's something your boss is giving you, but it's a way to extract more value from you.
And I'm sure employees that have little breaks and get to enjoy just a little bit of free time, they'll be happier employees. They'll probably be more productive. Like the
Calling Mr.
counterintuitive.
Bezos,
Yeah.
man, he should institute. I don't know if he has coffee breaks.
He
I
wants you to
sorta
be on
doubt it.
Adderall.
Yeah.
24/7, running to the next package. Now,
Yeah,
tell me about
patches.
your
Adderall
experience.
patches.
What your experience was like with the 3 months off, and then
Yeah.
then having the caffeine.
So I had this 3 months that was really unpleasant. The only things that were positive about it was I slept like a teenager. It really did improve my sleep. I had some great sleeps, like I remember from when I was a teenager. When you can sleep 14 hours. That was really good. I also felt, and I'm not proud of this, self-righteous. So, and I remember one morning having to get a 6 a.m. flight, and I had to get up and get myself moving on mint tea. Okay. And I get to the airport, and it's just when they're opening the Pete's and the Starbucks, and the line is like snaking, for those people getting on 6 a.m. flight. And I'm looking at these people, and they look like junkies you see in Amsterdam. They look so pathetic, and that they were hooked, and they needed their fix, and they look kind of miserable, and withdrawal was starting, because that first cup of coffee is not about the pleasure it gives us. It's really about stopping withdrawal symptoms, which are beginning overnight. You haven't had it for 24 hours. And I felt self-righteous. I'm not proud of that, because I knew that I was going to rejoin them as soon as I could.
Right.
So when I hit the 3-month mark, I decided, and I needed for the ending of the piece, to have a cup and see this was going to tell me, because drugs are very different the first time you take them, right? Before your body is accustomed to it. So I had this first cup, and I gave a lot of thought to where I would have it. I thought about the original Pete's is in my neighborhood, the very first Pete's. I don't love their coffee. It can be kind of burnt tasting. And so I went to a place called the Cheese Board, which is a cafe, bakery in my neighborhood. And they have a little pocket park out on the street. And I got a cup, got a special, which is, it's sort of like a cappuccino, but more coffee and less milk, like a flat white in Australia. And we sat, my wife and I, Judith, sat there, and I drank this drink, and it was so good. I mean, I just felt these waves of well-being, and then it turned into euphoria, and I was like, wow, this is such a strong drug. I had no idea. It was like cocaine or something. And that lasted for maybe 20 minutes, but then something turned that was kind of interesting. Across the street, there was a garbage truck that was grabbing hold of two plastic garbage cans and shaking them like this and making this horrible racket. And it really got under my skin. I was getting kind of irritable. And I said to Judith, can we go home? You know, and I felt, I got to get something done. I felt kind of compulsive.
Wow.
And so we walked home, and I went to my office, and I just had this desire to get shit done. And so what I did was, this is really weird, I unsubscribed from like 100 listservs that I was getting on my email that were really annoying. I just killed them one after another, and then after I finished that, I went through the sweater in my closet, all the sweaters in my closet, and I threw out some, I gave some away, and
This sounds like meth behavior. This is what I hear. I have a friend of mine.
I don't know. I've
Date
never
a girl who was on meth, and she always would clean. She
Really?
would come home and organize and clean things. He's like, so if your girl starts cleaning incessantly, she might be on
You
amphetamines.
have a problem. Yeah, I was really compulsive and very productive, and I said to myself,
Did you keep drinking it throughout the day?
well, no, but I was tempted to. So I said to myself, how can I hold on to this power that this drug has? Because if I start using it every day,